My parents rerouted $270,000 I had saved for 10 years to launch a private airstrip into a network of shell companies. When I confronted them, my father sneered, "Thanks for your trust. Your money now fuels your sister's aviation legacy." I started laughing, because what they took was actually their own laundered funds. I kept my walls bare. No photos, no art, just a whiteboard with calculations for hangar costs and runway grading. That studio apartment near the North Central Regional Airport wasn't much. 400 square feet of cracked tile, thin walls, and a shower that coughed more than it sprayed, but it was enough. It had to be. My name is Ronan Whitfield. I'm 33 years old, and I live in Cedar Springs, Iowa. Every morning, I'd wake up at 4, shower with water that turned cold halfway through, make instant coffee, and head to work by 5. I was a flight dispatcher for the regional routes. Nothing glamorous, mostly coordinating fuel loads, weather windows, and route changes, but it paid steadily, and every paycheck that cleared went straight into the same savings account I'd opened 11 years ago. My dream? A charter airstrip. Something small, functional, on open farmland west of town where the land was cheap and the sky was wide. Not for tourists or commercial airlines, just a place where I could run short-haul flights, emergency services, and maybe teach a few kids how to fly. The only luxury I allowed myself was a used aviation headset I'd snagged from a retiring pilot. Everything else, every drink I didn't buy, every movie I skipped, every trip I said no to was an investment in the runway that didn't exist yet. Of course, my parents had opinions. You know, my dad would say over Sunday calls, "It wouldn't kill you to diversify that savings. Maybe buy into Danielle's program. She's expanding." Danielle was my sister, 2 years younger, a master's in aviation management and the family's golden child. My parents had helped her buy her condo in Minneapolis, co-signed on her loans, celebrated every promotion like it was a Nobel Prize. Me? I was the backup plan, the fixer, the one they called when their cable stopped working or mom's phone needed updating. The good son. "Have you thought about letting Danielle help you?" My mom asked once. "She's got connections, real ones. Your father and I think if you pooled your savings." "No," I said flatly. "I'm doing this on my own." That always ended the conversation. Dad was a retired air traffic controller. Sharp, calculating, always right. His idea of love came with strings. Every bit of concern was a prelude to control. "Be a good brother, Ronan," he liked to say, usually when he was trying to get me to support Danielle's latest venture. Family's everything. We all rise together. But we didn't rise together. I'd spent the last decade budgeting rice and beans while Danielle got matching luggage and Instagrammable weekends in Napa. I didn't resent her. Not exactly. She wasn't malicious. Just entitled. Like she assumed I was fine living modestly so she could live loudly. Still, I never pushed back hard. I just nodded, smiled, changed the subject. Because deep down, I believed I was the quiet one. The dependable one. The one holding the family together from the shadows. What I didn't see then, what I refused to admit, was how that narrative served them more than it served me. Every time I declined help, they smiled a little too easily. Every time I skipped a vacation to save more, they didn't argue. They expected it. I thought I was preserving my dream, but they were counting on my silence. And somewhere between the daily flight logs and my tattered futon, I started to wonder if maybe I wasn't building a future so much as stalling in place. Still, I kept going. One deposit at a time. One weather reroute at a time. One dismissive family call at a time. Because dreams like mine didn't require applause. They just needed patience. Or so I thought. It started with the lag. I'd been using the same company-issued laptop for years. It was old but reliable, perfect for logging flight dispatch updates and managing my bank accounts after hours. I'd always been careful. No downloads. No sketchy sites. Just aviation software, spreadsheets, and my savings dashboard. But one night, after logging off from a rerouted freight flight to Duluth, I noticed something strange. The machine froze for a solid 20 seconds before my desktop appeared. Not just slow, off. Unnatural. I shrugged it off. Maybe an update. Maybe too many files open. But the next night, it happened again. And the night after that, I noticed the cursor jump slightly when I moved it, like someone else was tugging the wheel from behind the scenes. I ran a scan. Nothing came up. Still, a feeling lingered, like I wasn't alone on the machine. Then, that Sunday, I called my mom. Just routine. Catching up while I folded laundry. She always wanted to know if I was eating enough vegetables or meeting someone special. But that day, she said something that made my blood go cold. "So, Ronan," she said casually, like she was reading a grocery list, "looks like you've been moving money around again. You always were so careful about keeping exactly $27,000 in your side account. You still doing that weird system?" I sat upright. My stomach flipped. What? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She paused. You know, that little savings tracker. You always had it set up just so. I was just curious. I hadn't mentioned that tracker to anyone, not in over a decade. And the only people who'd ever seen that setup were my parents, back when I was 22, and naive enough to show them how I was saving. I'd even made them view-only logins for one of the old interfaces, back when I thought sharing my goals would make them proud. And then I remembered, I never changed those old passwords. Panic hit me like a freight train. I hung up mid-conversation, heart hammering. Opened my laptop. The lag was worse now, slower, like it was processing too much at once. I pulled up my bank account. Nothing. No balance. Just a message. Account temporarily unavailable. Please contact support. No. I scrambled through my emails. Dozens of confirmations. Transfer receipts. IP logins from cities I hadn't been to. Then I found it. A small application running silently in the background. Not a virus. Not a Trojan. Monitoring software. I felt sick. Whoever installed it had been watching for weeks. Maybe months. And then the real horror set in. I opened my second account. The real one. The one with everything. My heart stopped. Available balance. $47.13. Gone. All of it. $270,000. Vanished. I stared at the screen in disbelief, unable to breathe. My dream, my airstrip, my future gone. Just like that. And somewhere, in the silence of my apartment, I swore I could still hear my mom's voice echoing in my head. You always were so careful. Their house had always felt like a museum. Not a cozy home. Not even a proper house. Just a curated shrine to past accomplishments, trophies, plaques, old newspaper clippings. Everything polished and positioned. The lighting always slightly too bright, like they were preparing for visitors who never came. I hadn't been there in almost a year, not because I didn't want to, but because every visit came with a price, comments, comparisons, expectations disguised as love. Still, that afternoon, I drove the 2.5 hours to Mapleview, gripping the steering wheel like it owed me answers. I didn't call ahead. I just walked up the steps and rang the doorbell, my hands still shaking from the empty bank app. I'd barely slept, couldn't eat, couldn't think. I knew. I didn't have proof, not yet. But I knew. My mother answered, her makeup perfect, her smile automatic. Ronan, she said, eyebrows raised. You should have told us you were coming. I would have. Where's Dad? I cut in. She blinked. In the den. I brushed past her. The place smelled like lemon cleaner and old leather. Nothing personal. Just sterile. He was sitting in his usual spot, reclined with the local news on mute and a tumbler of water on the side table. Not whiskey. Not wine. Just the disciplined, boring drink of a man who wanted to seem in control. Hey, bud, he said without looking at me. Something wrong. I didn't sit. You know what's wrong. That made him look. I checked my accounts. Nothing. No flicker of guilt. No twitch. Just a blank stare. They're empty, I said. Every dollar. $270,000. Gone. He sipped his water. That's a shame, he said, cool as ice. You should be more careful with passwords. I stared at him, stunned. You're not even going to pretend? That's when he smiled. Not a big smile. Just the smallest, most infuriating curve of his mouth. You think this is betrayal? He asked, finally standing. Son, that money didn't disappear. It was redirected, reassigned. It's being used for legacy. What the hell does that mean? He nodded toward the hallway. I followed his gaze. There, along the wall, were all the family photos. Framed degrees. News clippings. All Danielle. Her ribbon cutting at some aviation consultancy in Minneapolis. Her keynote at a transport summit. Her smiling face under a caption that read, "The future of flight is female." Danielle's consulting firm is expanding, my father said. Real vision. Real growth. She's doing things that matter. We helped her. You helped her. I felt my face burn. You stole from me, I said. You gave us access, he shrugged. You never changed the credentials. We just made use of what you left open. My mother appeared at the doorway, folding her arms. It's not theft, Ronan. It's family. I laughed. Sharp. Bitter. Are you hearing yourselves? She stepped forward. We've done more for you than you remember, she said, chin high. You wouldn't have had that savings if we hadn't helped with your first job. With that dispatch program. No. I snapped. You didn't build that. I did. I worked nights. Ate cereal for years. Slept in a studio the size of your laundry room. And you were watching the whole time, waiting for a chance to take it. They didn't flinch. My father leaned against the wall. Be a good brother, he said. Support something that matters. I felt something inside me break. And in its place, something else took root. Not rage. Not grief. Resolve. Cold. Steady. If this was what family meant to them, manipulation dressed as legacy, then I was done playing along. I turned without another word and walked out, the trophies watching me like ghosts. Ivy answered the door barefoot, holding a slice of pizza in one hand and a screwdriver in the other. "Wow," she said, glancing at my face. "You look like you just buried a body or got buried by one. I need a place to crash." "No questions asked," she replied, stepping aside. "Wipe your shoes. Don't judge the pile of cables on the couch." Her apartment was the exact opposite of my parents' house. Messy, lived in, loud with plants and mismatched lamps. It smelled like soldering flux and Thai food. I dropped my backpack by the front door and collapsed onto the only empty spot on the couch. "Ivy," I said after a long silence. "They stole everything." She raised an eyebrow and sat on the floor, cross-legged, her laptop already balanced on her knees. "Everything as in, my parents. They drained my savings. Over $250,000. They used some kind of monitoring software to watch me. Then they pulled the funds through an old account I forgot they had access to." She didn't blink, just took another bite of pizza and said, "Okay, first, we figure out how. Then we figure out what they did with it." It was like flipping a switch. Ivy didn't pity me. She didn't ask me how I felt. She just got to work. She was a ground systems analyst at a local avionics company, but her real skill was digital forensics. I'd met her 3 years ago when she trained dispatchers on satellite data retrieval. We'd stayed friends even after she left the company. Ivy liked puzzles. This was just another one. "I need your laptop," she said. I hesitated. "You want answers or sentimentality?" I handed it over. For the next 4 hours, she didn't speak unless she had to. She muttered to herself as she moved through command prompts and ghost partitions. Around midnight, she whistled low. "Found it," she said. "They didn't just install tracking software. They linked your keystrokes to a remote logger and mirrored your browser sessions. So they were watching me log into my accounts." "Yep, and they weren't just taking money. Look at this." She turned the screen. A list of IP addresses. Transfers, not to Danielle directly, but to shell companies, newly formed LLCs, dummy accounts, and every transfer authorized under my name. "They were laundering money," she said. "Through you." My mouth went dry. "Laundering?" "Yep. Looks like they moved dirty funds, probably from Danielle's consulting firm, and passed them through your account to make it look clean. That's why they needed access. That's why they kept it hidden." I leaned back, stunned. "So I'm not just a victim. I'm the fall guy." Ivy nodded. "They've been setting you up. If this blows up, it's your name on the transfer logs. Not theirs. They're clean. You're the liability." Outside, someone's dog barked. A siren echoed faintly in the distance. Danielle's voice played in my head. Polished, poised, always grateful in interviews. I learned everything from my mentors, my parents. They taught me what vision looks like. My fingers curled into fists. "They think they won." Ivy looked up, her eyes sharp behind smudged glasses. "No," she said. "They think you're alone. That's their mistake." And just like that, I knew. Whatever came next, I wasn't going to roll over. I wasn't their scapegoat anymore. I had backup. It was close to 3 in the morning when I realized I might have outsmarted them without meaning to. I was sitting cross-legged on Ivy's living room floor, sorting through a pile of printed transfer logs and handwritten notes, when I saw it. One of the account numbers looked off. "Ivy," I said, nudging her foot with mine. "Can you pull up the Chase transfer badge from March?" She rubbed her eyes, reached for her laptop, and started typing. "Got it." I slid one of the receipts across the coffee table. "That's not my real savings account." She stared at the paper, then back at the screen. "Then what the hell is it?" I shook my head slowly, a strange mix of dread and adrenaline bubbling up. "I set up a decoy account back in February. I don't even know why. Just instinct, maybe. I moved most of my savings there when I saw some weird behavior on the old platform. I never closed the original account because I didn't want to tip off the bank." "You're telling me," she said, squinting, "the money they stole wasn't your actual savings?" I nodded. The account they drained was only holding around 12 grand at the time. The rest, everything else, was sitting in a different bank entirely, under a fresh routing number. New credentials, no linked devices. I did it in a rush. Didn't even tell anyone. Ivy stared at me for a beat, then slowly grinned. "Holy shit, Ronan. You reverse-launched a sting operation without even knowing." She clicked rapidly, cross-checking the accounts. Okay. So here's what actually happened. They used you to wash funds, ran them through what they thought was your real account to make it look like clean capital. And when they finally pulled the trigger to grab the cash, they ended up stealing their own damn money. I blinked. She sat back, laughing. "That's the dumbest, most poetic trap I've ever seen." "Ronan, you left a financial banana peel on the floor, and they just face-planted in front of God and the IRS." I let out a breath that felt like it had been stuck in my chest for weeks. It hadn't been my money, not the bulk of it. The transfers they made, the ones traced under my name, were theirs. Dirty funds rerouted through a dummy account they thought I was too dumb to hide. "They framed themselves," I muttered. "I didn't lose my savings. I just caught their operation on accident." Ivy raised her drink in a mock toast. "To reverse laundering entrapment," she said, smirking. "May your enemies always underestimate you." And for the first time in weeks, I laughed. A real one. Not bitter, not broken, just relief. Cold and clear. They had dug their own grave. All I did was point out the hole. By the time the sun rose, we had a case file that could bury a mid-tier Ponzi scheme. Ivy called it Ronan's Revenge Binder, which made me laugh harder than I expected to, considering my entire identity had just been used as a laundering puppet. We printed everything: browser logs, IP addresses, shell company registrations, and a neat little diagram Ivy made showing how the stolen funds looped through my decoy account and back into Danielle's firm. "I should have been an art major," she said, holding up the diagram with mock pride. "It's got arrows, color coding, a splash of betrayal red." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. At 9 a.m. sharp, Ivy put me in touch with someone she knew from her old network, Zaina Kerr, a cybersecurity legal liaison for a federal agency that investigated high-level financial crimes. "She's blunt," Ivy warned me, "and allergic to bullshit. But she's good." Zaina picked up on the first ring. "Talk," she said. So I did. I walked her through everything. My parents' access to the old savings portal, the spyware on my laptop, the transaction logs, and finally, the decoy account. Ivy jumped in occasionally, correcting my terminology or sending screenshots in real time. There was a long pause when I finished. Then, "You're lucky you caught this when you did," Zaina said. "If it had gone another few weeks, you might have been arrested before anyone even asked you a question." That hit me harder than I expected. "I didn't know," I said quietly. "I just wanted to build an airstrip." She didn't offer sympathy, just professionalism. "I believe you," she said. "But belief doesn't matter in court. Documentation does. And it looks like you've got a hell of a trail." Within 2 hours, we had an appointment set up at a regional field office. Ivy drove, insisting that I wasn't going to show up looking like a zombie with an unlicensed conspiracy theory. "Shower," she ordered. "Real clothes. No hoodie of shame." Inside the office, we were escorted to a private room by a sharp-looking agent with a badge clipped to her belt and a laptop tucked under her arm. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, sitting down across from me, "I understand you have reason to believe you've been a victim of identity misuse and financial laundering?" "Yes," I said, sliding the binder across the table. For the next 45 minutes, I laid it all out. Every password I never changed. Every transaction I never approved. Every time I ignored the quiet voice in my gut telling me to double-check something. They listened, asked sharp questions, took notes, made copies of our evidence. And when it was all over, the agent nodded and said the words I didn't expect to hear so soon. "This is enough to open a full investigation." I sat back in my chair, not because I wanted to relax, but because for the first time since my savings vanished, I felt like gravity was shifting, not in their favor. In mine, the wheels of justice had started turning, and this time, they weren't turning silently. The raid wasn't televised. No flashing lights. No dramatic chopper shots or news vans camped outside. But it was devastating just the same. The agents moved quietly, surgically, like they had done this 100 times before. Ivy and I waited in a rented sedan 2 blocks down from the old brick office where my parents ran their consultancy firm. They called it Whitfield Advisory Group. From the outside, it looked like a regular aviation logistics business. Professional signage, navy blue logo, even a little gold plaque near the door. Inside, it was a shell, a front. "They're 15 minutes behind schedule," Ivy muttered, chewing her thumbnail. "That's either good news or we're in the wrong stakeout movie." But then, right on time, 3 black SUVs pulled up to the curb. 5 agents stepped out in jackets marked with initials that would make my father's blood run cold. We watched in tense silence as the team filed inside. No hesitation, no drama, just precision. I couldn't see much from our angle, but I imagined my dad at his desk, sipping from his stainless steel water bottle, making calls, still thinking he was untouchable, until the knock, until the badges, until they started naming shell companies he didn't think anyone knew existed. At 10:47 a.m., they escorted both of my parents out in cuffs, not roughly, but firmly, controlled. My father's face was tight, his jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. He scanned the street like he was searching for someone to blame. He didn't see me, but I saw him, and that was enough. By noon, the arrest had made its way into the local business journal. Aviation consultancy executives arrested in federal financial fraud probe. No names at first, just titles, but I knew the names would follow. And they did. That evening, I sat alone in Ivy's apartment while news alerts buzzed one after the other. Their photos, professional headshots they'd probably paid a fortune for, were now attached to headlines about embezzlement, laundering, and conspiracy. Danielle released a statement online. I had no knowledge of my parents' financial dealings. I am cooperating fully with the investigation and am deeply saddened by this situation. My focus remains on my company and my team. No mention of me, not a single word. But I wasn't surprised. She was always careful with her image, always poised. Ivy read the statement aloud, eyebrows raised. Well, no responsibility, just brand continuity. She's good, too good, I muttered, but not invincible. The agents had confirmed that while Danielle hadn't been arrested, yet, she was now officially under review. Her accounts, her affiliations, her transfers. And thanks to the evidence we provided, they had a clear trail of where the money had gone, who touched it, and how they tried to bury it. Later that night, I got a call from the lead investigator. They tried to pin it on you, she said. At first, they claimed you were involved, said you volunteered your accounts to help facilitate transfers. But the logs prove otherwise. We've got them dead to rights. I didn't feel triumph, just silence. Heavy, still. The tower they built, of pride, of deception, of polished lies, was crumbling. And they were buried beneath the weight of their own illusion. The internet did what it always does. Within a day of the arrest, the gossip train rolled out of the station with full steam, articles, tweets, Reddit threads. The Whitfield family downfall wasn't national news, but in aviation circles and regional business groups, it was wildfire. People who once toasted to my parents' brilliance were suddenly scrambling to distance themselves. Danielle, as expected, played it flawlessly. She went on a podcast 3 days later, voice steady and polished. It's been a challenging time, she said, but I'm committed to transparency and growth. I love my family, but I also have to focus on rebuilding trust in my leadership. She didn't name me. She never would. But in a now-deleted tweet, she wrote, "Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it's the ones closest to you. Silence can be the loudest weapon." That was the shot across the bow. I didn't respond, didn't share the tweet, didn't do interviews. I let the federal documents speak. But the backlash wasn't one-sided. People I hadn't spoken to in years, old coworkers, classmates, even distant cousins, started messaging me. Some offered support, quiet validation. A few even admitted they'd always sensed something was off about my parents, but never wanted to rock the boat. Others were less forgiving. "You didn't have to destroy them," one message read. "You could have handled this in private." Another said, "Danielle's worked so hard for everything. Why tear her down now?" They didn't know what I knew, what I'd lived, that this wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. Still, it stung. Every text that implied I'd betrayed my family. Every subtle jab disguised as concern. Ivy noticed me scrolling through the messages one night. "Stop reading those," she said, sliding my phone out of my hand. "You didn't burn the bridge. They built it out of lies and lit the match themselves." I nodded, but part of me still felt the old pull guilt, shame, that reflexive need to explain myself. I didn't. Instead, I worked. I stayed quiet. I waited for the next court update. I answered the federal agent's questions. I provided more documentation when asked, and I leaned on Ivy more than I wanted to admit. She never asked for anything, just kept her apartment open, her fridge half-stocked, and her sarcasm perfectly timed. When the world around me felt like static, she was the only frequency I could still tune into. I wasn't whole, not yet, but I was standing, and that, after everything, felt like enough. The courtroom wasn't dramatic. No gavel slams or shouting matches. No last-minute confessions. Just a long, quiet process that stretched across months. Legal procedures, depositions, evidence files thicker than bricks. Most of it was handled behind closed doors. I only had to testify once. I did not authorize those transactions, I said simply, when asked. The agent nodded. The judge did too. Danielle never showed her face in court. Her lawyers tried to keep her clear of anything that might taint her brand. But the damage had been done. Even without charges, the trail of complicity was enough to freeze her company's contracts, shatter partnerships, and sink her polished persona into scandal. My parents weren't so lucky. They were convicted on multiple counts: fraud, identity theft, laundering. The sentencing was stiff, but not surprising. Years, not months. Federal time. Enough to make their legacy an obituary in the financial registry. When the verdict came in, I didn't feel like cheering. There was no vindication. Just a slow release, like I'd been holding my breath for over a decade without knowing it. I used to think justice would feel loud. It didn't. It felt quiet. A couple months later, the reimbursement process began. The government traced a good chunk of the stolen money, some still sitting in dormant LLC accounts, some tangled in frozen assets. I got most of it back. Not all, but enough. Enough to build something real. The land wasn't hard to find. 2 flat acres just outside Ashland, Nebraska. Cheap, open, and far from anything that smelled like legacy. I bought a small prefab hangar and had it trucked in, signed the land permit, installed a windsock, a fuel tank, and a battered picnic table under a tin awning. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I named it Redline Field. Simple, honest, no branding, no legacy, just sky. The first flight I logged was a solo rental from a crop dusting outfit, an old pilot named Mac who nodded once and said, "About time someone gave this area a place to land." Ivy came out on weekends. Sometimes she brought her laptop, sometimes a cooler full of cheap beer. She called it Ronan's Flight Club for emotionally sunburned introverts. I didn't argue. We'd sit under the awning and watch the sky, plan nothing, just exist. Sometimes we talked about what came next. Sometimes we didn't. One evening, as we watched the last plane of the day disappear into the pink and gold horizon, Ivy asked me if I ever missed them. I knew who she meant. I thought about the trophies, the pressure, the way my father always said be a good brother with a smirk that tasted like a leash. "No," I said, after a while. "I don't miss them." I paused, then added, "I miss what I thought they were." She nodded. "That'll fade." And I believed her. I wasn't fixed. I wasn't healed. But I was free. The runway stretched ahead of me, bare, quiet, full of promise. This time, I wasn't flying towards someone else's dream. This time, I was building my own.